I want to make something very clear in this video so there's no room for misunderstanding. Even if all religion in the world, every single person that has ever believed in a god or gods, came together and tried to prove the existence of their god or gods, they still wouldn't be able to do it. Now, I understand why they would want to do that, but they can't. They do want to have the ability to do that because of the nature of faith and belief-based systems. If you think about it, in order to actually prove the existence of a god or gods, you have to have verifiable empirical evidence. And I mean like smoking gun type evidence. You know, like say you were in your house and you saw God walking down the hallway, or maybe you were outside and you saw God sitting on a cloud and you could verify with your own senses that this being is indeed God. Or maybe you have a conversation with God. You talk to God and you verify that this being is God. Those are things that you could use to prove the existence of God. But you can't do any of those things because God by definition is beyond our perception. God is not subject to our perception or reality. God exists outside of our reality. Now I understand the desire to want to prove the existence of God. That's what people have been trying to do since the beginning of humanity. People have been trying to come up with ways to prove the existence of God. And that's because human beings have an innate desire to know the truth. We want to know what we believe is true. If you ask 100 people why they believe in God, or 100 people will tell you because I have faith in God. But I guarantee you at least one of those 100 people will say, I wish I could prove to everybody else that my God is real. Because not only do I believe in him, I want other people to believe in him too. And I think the best way to do that is to show them proof that he exists. Now it is important to remember that just because somebody believes in something doesn't necessarily make it true. Just because you believe that unicorns are real, it doesn't mean that unicorns are real. It doesn't matter how much evidence you bring to bear on this issue. If you believe that unicorns are real, it's still not true. Because here's the thing, if you define a unicorn as a horse with a single horn on its head, then by definition there cannot be such a thing as a unicorn. Because if it was a horse, it would be a quadruped for legs. And if it had a horn on its head, it would be a unicorn. So by definition, these two things cannot coexist in one animal. Therefore, there cannot be such a thing as a unicorn. See how that works? So when people try to come up with arguments to prove the existence of God, they always fail. Not because they're bad at arguing, but because the argument is inherently flawed. Let me give you an example of this. One of the most common arguments used to prove the existence of God is the cosmological argument, which goes something like this. How did the universe begin? Well, it began with a cause. The universe is here, therefore there must be a cause for it. The cause is God. Now let's break that down. The universe is here. However, the conclusion that you drew from that, namely that therefore there must be a cause, is not a valid conclusion to draw from that premise. It's like saying, how did the water get in the glass? Well, it got there through a straw. No, it didn't. How did the water get in the glass? Somebody poured it in. Who poured the water in the glass? The guy who was drinking it. Did the guy who was drinking it pour the water in the glass? Now, so let's get rid of that part of the argument. How did the universe begin? Well, it began with a cause. The universe is here. Therefore, there must be a cause. Let's get rid of the universe is here part. How did it begin? Well, it began with a cause. Okay, fine, let's grant you that. What is that cause? God. Wait a minute, you haven't proven anything yet. You just said that the cause was God. Who is God? An all-powerful, all-knowing, eternal being that exists outside of time and space and is the source of all life, energy, and matter. And you're telling me that the question of how did the universe begin? The answer to that is God. That doesn't make any sense at all. Here's another example. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 7, Jesus says, Ask and you shall receive. Seek and they shall find. Knock and the door shall be open unto you. Many Christians use this verse to argue for the existence of God. They say, see, Jesus told us that if we ask, we shall receive. So God must exist because if we ask him for something, he'll give it to us. Again, let's break that down. Jesus said, ask and you shall receive. He also said, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Christians believe that Jesus was God. So if Jesus said to love your enemies and do good to those who hate you, but Christians don't do that, then Christianity is false. Because if Jesus was God, then everything he said should be true, right? So if God isn't real, then everything that Jesus said isn't true. Therefore, Jesus isn't God. Therefore, Christianity is false. Does that make sense? I know what you're thinking. Ew, that's a clever argument. But it doesn't work like that. The Bible says that in the last days, men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, and the lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. So if you look at the world around you, it seems like everything the Bible said would happen in the last days is happening right now. Does that mean that we're in the last days? No, it doesn't. Why? Because it doesn't work like that. Here's why. The Bible is 66 books written over a period of about 1,500 years by at least 40 different authors. There are over 40,000 references to prophecy in the Bible. And out of all that, there's only one verse that talks about what would happen in the last days. And you're telling me that out of all the prophecies in the Bible, You've found the one that says what will happen in the last days, and you're rebasing your argument for the existence of God on that. Come on, be serious. You could take any argument anyone has ever made for the existence of God, and you could find flaws in it. It doesn't matter how hard people try, they still won't be able to prove the existence of God, because the burden of proof lies with the person making the claim. In order to prove the existence of God, you have to have verifiable empirical evidence. And I mean like smoking gun type evidence. Like I said earlier, you can't have a conversation with God and say, hey, this is my evidence, I talked to you. You can't go up to heaven and see what's going on up there and say, I saw this, this, and this. You can't do any of those things. You can't prove the existence of God, because God by definition is beyond our perception. God exists outside of our reality. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, if you can't prove the existence of God, and that means God doesn't exist. No, it doesn't. Just because you can't prove the existence of God doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It just means that you don't have an argument to say that God does exist. All you have is faith. And that's okay. Faith is a good thing. I have faith in things that I can't prove. I have faith that gravity works tomorrow. I have faith that my car will start when I need it to. I have faith that I'll be able to breathe tomorrow. I have faith in all kinds of things that I can't prove. But the difference between my faith and religious faith is that I do want to try to prove my faith. I do want to go around trying to convince people that they should have the same faith that I have. I don't try to force my faith on other people. Why? Because if you really believe that your God is real, then you shouldn't have a problem with other people not believing in your God, right? Because if you're really talking to God, then it doesn't matter what anybody else believes. It doesn't matter what anybody else says, because you know that you're talking to God. So if you're trying to prove the existence of God and at the same time you're saying that you can't prove the existence of God, then you're contradicting yourself. You're saying two things that cannot both be true. This whole idea that Christians need to try to prove the existence of God is just a reaction to what they perceive as a threat to their faith. And I understand why they feel that way. We all want to be able to prove what we believe is true. But the problem is that they're approaching this the wrong way. They're really trying to use logic and reason to prove something that is by definition beyond logic and reason. God is beyond our perception, so you can't prove his existence. But that doesn't mean he doesn't exist. It just means that you have to decide whether or not you're going to have faith in him. And I hope that clears up any confusion about why Christians can't prove the existence of God. Thanks for watching.